So,
Well,
you want to start by telling us about how you got started in the Air Force? How did that all come about? Did you enlist or?
well, yes, I enlisted in the aviation cadet program. Was in then the U.S. Army Air Corps. There wasn't an Air Force in those days. That came after the war, and the aviation cadet training involved transferring from several different training schools of different disciplines. Uh, the idea being winding up as a commissioned officer in the service. I wound up at the Bombardier School in San Angelo, Texas, and which was like a 6 month program learning how to be a qualified bombardier. And
How did you end up getting into the Bombardier thing?
well, I started out in the pilot program, and I got myself in trouble. I had been buying a monthly war bond, which I had been talked into somewhere along the line, and they deducted $18.75 from my monthly salary of $75, uh, and turned this into a war bond, which they in turn mailed to my parents' home for safekeeping. And that went on for several months. And I finally decided I couldn't afford it. And I requested that it be stopped. And I had trouble stopping it. And when I was in primary flying school in Lakeland, Florida, someone gave me an address and said, "This is the place, you really ought to write them a letter and they'll get it fixed for you." So I did that. And that was absolutely the wrong thing to do, because the commandant of the school uh, became irritated. He heard about it, and they did stop taking the money out of my paycheck every month. And there was nothing wrong with my performance. I had completed 44 hours flying in a Stearman PT-17 airplane, and I liked it a lot and was doing fine. And they had no complaints with me in that regard. And one day he called me into his office, and he was really upset. And I'm standing there at attention, and he's chewing me out for why on earth did I ever do such a dumb thing. And all I had to do was let him know, and he would have taken care of it. But I did let him know through channels, and nothing ever happened. So he said he couldn't figure out anything bad enough to do to me. Uh, so I still had in mind the idea that I wanted to complete aviation cadet training and earn a commission in the Army. And so he agreed that he would send me to Bombardier School and end my pilot training as a punishment for what I had done. And that happened very quickly, and I wound up the next step going to aerial gunnery school. And following aerial gunnery school, I went to Bombardier School in San Angelo, Texas, which was like a 6 or 8 month training program, learning how to use the Norden bomb sight in daylight and darkness and every conceivable way. And I proceeded through that course and graduated, and got a commission and was assigned to Rapid City, South Dakota, which was a B-17 combat crew school. And I arrived in Rapid City and became a part of a crew. I'm not sure how they ever decided the makeup of a crew, but somehow it worked out, and we all were very well matched, and we got along just fine. And the idea at Rapid City was, if your crew really does a great job, you may be fortunate enough to be assigned to the 8th Air Force. Crews left Rapid City and went to all parts of the world. And the idea being the better crews would be assigned to the 8th, which was very involved in the European War at that time. And we didn't have any idea, but when we got there, we found out that it was the most dangerous service in the entire military. Yeah, I was in Rapid City in 1943.
Okay.
In the end of 1943, we went overseas, sailed out of New York, and we were assigned to the 8th Air Force, which we thought was great. And we were all very pleased that we had done a good job. We were made up of, from all parts of the U.S. The pilot was from San Francisco. The co-pilot was also from an area near San Francisco. The navigator was from Toledo, Ohio. I was from Springfield, Massachusetts. The engineer was from Waterloo, Iowa. The tail gunner was from Philadelphia. The waist gunner was from some small town in Virginia. And the ball turret gunner was from Santa Barbara, California. There were 9 of us, and they put us together, and we were a very congenial, harmonious bunch. It was kind of amazing, actually. So we wound up sailing out of New York City on the HMS Aquitania, heading for England. Yeah, the 9 of us as a crew. There were 10,000 soldiers on board the Aquitania going across. 100 of them were made up of Air Force crews, and we were one of the 100 airmen on the ship. And we landed in the Firth of Clyde in Scotland in about 3 days. The ship made very good time getting across the ocean, and we were worried about submarines. The Aquitania was fast enough to outrun submarines, so they weren't particularly worried. We picked up destroyers in the last day or day and a half of the trip. The whole trip only took like 3.5 days, and we pulled into an area called the Firth of Clyde in Scotland. And we took a tender to the docks from the ship, where we got on a train, and we went from that area in Scotland down to England, and we got off in around Norwich, England somewhere, and took a truck, an army truck picked us up there and brought us to Framingham, which is part of what they call East Anglia, right on almost on the coast of England. And we were assigned to the 390th Bomb Group, which is made up of 4 squadrons of B-17s, 12 planes per squadron. And we became part of the 570th Squadron of the 390th Bomb Group. And we were welcomed at the base by the colonel who ran the 390th group. We were assigned to a barracks. And this barracks that we lived in was what I would call a Quonset hut, and there were probably 8 crews of 4 officers each, probably 32 men living in this hut, evenly on each side, with potbelly stoves, and it was maintained by Filipino mess boys, and they took care of making your bed and cleaning the place up and running the stoves, and we burned candle coal in a potbelly stove to heat the place. You know, it worked pretty good. Had a very nice officers club and an officers mess hall, and in those days, I don't imagine you could do that today with the ethics involved, but when you walked in the door, it said officers mess, and then you had to either go left or right, and the door to the right said rated officers only, which meant you had to be a flying officer to go in and eat in that section of the officers mess hall. There would be 4 officers on each B-17 crew, and so we always ate together, and the food was very good, and particularly on mission days, it was very important. As the Filipino mess boy, it was his job to wake you up, and we used to watch for a flag on the operations building, which told us whether there was a mission tomorrow, and a second flag, different color, would tell you whether your squadron was going or not. And so you had to watch all that to figure out what you're going to do that evening, and get to bed early if you were on the call, because chances are the mess boy would wake you up about 3:30 in the morning, and so you had to shower and shave in the evening before you went to bed.
So you got there, and how long did it take before you went on your first mission?
A couple of weeks we were there, and the colonel introduced us to some of the executives around the base, and said we would be given a plane, and we would fly around England for about a week and become familiar with the airport. And the place was covered with air bases, so you had to be very careful or you'd land at the wrong airport. Because
there were a few practice flights.
Yes.
Before you went on a bombing run?
Yeah, these were custom practice flights to get used to the surroundings and the runways and things of that sort. And then you would be assigned to your first mission, of which I wound up having flown 19 of them.
Tell me about the first one. That sounds like a scary one.
The first mission was, they were all pretty exciting, but actually the getting ready for the mission after the mess guy woke you up at 3:30 in the morning, the next step was to go to breakfast, and breakfast was really a great meal, because chances are you wouldn't have any more food for another 12 hours or more. And so you could have almost anything that comes to mind. They had everything. Then you would go to a briefing, and they would give you the details of the trip that day, where you were going. Yeah, and it's all of this is done in the pitch dark, and was usually misty or raining or typical English weather. It was never just perfect, bright, sunny morning, and that was one of the most critical parts of the whole day, was getting the plane absolutely ready to go and making sure everything was just the way you wanted it. And we had a crew chief in our plane, who was a really great fellow, and we were all 21, 22 years old, and this crew chief had probably been in the Army for 25 years or 20 years or more, and he was probably 40 or 50 years old, so he was like your father almost, this fellow, and he was usually a master sergeant, and we became great pals, and my job, of course, was to examine the bombs and the fuses and make sure everything was ready to go and looked right, and understand what the bomb load was that day, and get on board. And all this was done in the pitch dark, and there were no lights, and there wouldn't be any lights. Matter of fact, we took off in the pitch dark, and there was no radio communication allowed. So everything was done by colored flares. And you had what they called a flimsy, which was a tissue paper sheet which gave you the details of the day for the trip, different things that, pieces of information that you needed. And you'd climb on board and get seated, and at a certain color flare, they'd start the first engine and then keep going and get the 4 engines going, and start the taxi out to the runway and follow the right plane, and again, all in the pitch dark. And in those days, everything was complicated. We didn't have the lighting system. Was the instrument were lighted, but pardon me, you had to use what we called a purple light, which was a separate fixture with a purple lamp that showed that on your instruments, and then you could read them in the dark. That was the only way you could see that. The instrument itself did not light up, and that was true for every instrument on the plane. And if anything happened to that purple lamp, you had to get that fixed right away because it was going to be very important. And we'd taxi out to the runway, and all of this without any extra conversation. It was strictly a business, well-trained, disciplined group of 9 guys on this plane, and they all did their thing.
Were you apprehensive?
Well, yeah, you kind of wondered. We had what we call the Kodak report in the briefing session. They had stripped down P-38 fighter planes and Mosquitoes, British Mosquitoes, or Spitfires, that traversed all over Germany. So the Germans wouldn't know we were going to any particular area. They covered the whole place, and their job was to report back the weather conditions. And we would keep right up to the minute on the Kodak report. But in all the taxiing out and everything, there's no conversation with anybody, except we may have an internal conversation. That was all right. But not with the tower or anything else. Everything was done by flares. And we'd take the runway, and that was always kind of interesting. A lot of conversation between the pilot and the engineer. As we started down the runway, the idea was we had to get up to 120 miles an hour or the plane just wouldn't take off. The engineer would be counting out the airspeed as we progressed down the runway, and it was kind of an exciting session as the speed built up, waiting for him to announce that we're now at 120. And about when we got to that point, we were just about at the end of the runway, and the pilot would lift the plane off, and we would shudder a little bit and get up in the air. And then we would fly to a designated, what they called a buncher station, which was a radio beacon. And at that beacon, we would start circling in a counterclockwise direction, and which was always kind of exciting, and because chances are the cloud cover would continue all the way up to 10 or 12,000 feet perhaps, and we would circle um, at a certain airspeed and at a certain turn, a radius, and maintain this all the way up until we broke out of the overcast or out of the clouds and we got into the clear sky where it was usually a bright sunny morning by then.
How many planes were taken off here at the same time?
Well, there would be 36 planes from our group, 3 squadrons of 12 each. And
Never smashed into each other?
no, no, it was kind of amazing, but no, we never. Not that I have never knew of an accident.
So you get up above the clouds and you can see all the other planes?
Yeah, we're then picking up, and the pilots get into the squadron formation, and
This is stuff you had practiced in South Dakota?
oh yeah,
You had that all down?
we all knew exactly how to do that. Yeah.
And how close were you to the other planes?
Oh, very, very, very close. You know, the wings almost touched. They could touch. I guess at times some of them did, but we never had that problem. But they were very close. You could see the people in the other plane and wave to them, and we were right next to them. And of course, it was very cold. It was getting colder as the higher we got, and you had to turn on your electric suit and get on an oxygen mask after 10,000 feet, and finally we'd be at a level where we would sort of level off and head across the English Channel.
How high were you flying then?
Well, no, most of our missions were probably above 26 or 28,000. The highest we ever flew was about 32,000 feet. And it's pretty cold up there. It's about 55 below zero, and of course there's no oxygen, and so you're really kind of pinned down in your seat. I then had to, when we got on a straight level course, I had to get back to the bomb bay and arm the bombs, and that was strictly a matter of removing what we call the arming wire, which had blocked or locked each fuse on each bomb, and depending on the size of the bombs, determine the number of bombs you had. And
So it's just like a little pin you had to pull out?
it was a wire, a bombing wire, and it was easy to do, but you had to get back there with an oxygen bottle, and it was kind of awkward and very cold. Of course, the bomb bay door was closed, so that made it a little safer. Then we'd be on our way, and it was all very well laid out. We had what we called this flimsy, which gave us the instructions for the day, different color flares, what they meant, and what the conversation words were and what they meant. For instance, things like scotch and soda might have meant we're going to take a left turn very shortly, kind of thing. Code words, yeah. And the flimsy would give you all that. And
And there was a lead plane that kind of led the formation?
yes, yeah.
Was that the same one all the time? Or?
Oh no. Well, no. It would be a different. It might be the full colonel, the boss man for our entire bomb group, flying, or his assistant, or it was usually a very senior officer in the lead plane, flying the lead plane. There we were. We would just climb to a predetermined altitude and head for the target. Our first mission was a different one for the 8th Air Force. We entered Europe. We entered the continent from the south, which was the first time they ever did that. So it made us all a little bit nervous. We had to fly down over northern Italy and across the Alps and into Germany from the south. And the target was down in that area, but
So some city in southern Germany?
yeah,
Is that mostly what you bombed, is the cities?
yeah, yeah.
Factories or?
Yeah, well, various targets. We hit a lot of rail yards, a lot of factory areas, that type of thing. We did some interesting things. We used a lot of counterfeit ration stamps and things like that to try and screw up the local economy of a major city. These would be strapped on the bombs, and paper phony counterfeit German ration stamps and things, and that would, of course, when the bomb blew up, they would blow all over the place, and hopefully enough of them would hang together that it would really confuse the natives. That was kind of fun.
So your job in the front there was what happened when you got on the bomber run? That's when you took over.
Yes, yeah. The idea was to get on course for the what we would call on course, and when I had determined that we were doing that, we had a pilot direction indicator, which was a function of the automatic pilot system, which worked through the bomb site, and we would center the PDI, the pilot direction indicator, which I would do through the bomb site. And when I had mine centered, the pilot would center his. So then we were both exactly heading on the exact same course. And he would then lock in the automatic pilot system, and I would then be steering the airplane toward the target, which I could pick up. And from those high altitudes, that was one of the things you had to learn, and we practiced that a lot in South Dakota in our training. At 30,000 feet, a city 20 miles away is practically right underneath you. You have to kind of figure that out and get used to where is that city, how far away are we, and it comes to you after a while. It's pretty easy to figure out, but the bombardier would steer the airplane through the bomb site, through the automatic pilot system, which was a Honeywell system, and worked very well, very smoothly. I couldn't change the altitude of the plane, but I could steer the plane left and right and keep it on the course that I wanted it to be on.
You would go through this bomb site? It was like a magnifying glass, or?
No, it was a telescope, really, that you were looking through, and it was maintained stable by a gyro system, very high-speed gyro in there that kept you looking right at what you wanted to be looking at, and regardless of what the plane might be doing. And then at the right moment, I would decide when I had to open the bomb bay doors, and depending on fighter aircraft, enemy fighters that might be attacking us or whatever, we would get the bomb bay doors open, and that changed the airplane a little bit in terms of speed, and but it didn't bother the course at all. And the course was the important item. And
a racket when you opened that thing.
Yeah, it did. It really did. And of course, it introduced a lot of cold air also, but it was already so cold in the plane that it didn't really matter. And there wasn't any wind or anything that came in. Just a noise, and you knew the doors were open.
How did they open? Did they have a crank, or?
No, it was electric. I opened them with a switch, and we had a predetermined way of signaling each other when I was going to do that. And then when the bomb bay doors were open, we were ready to let them go. And
how do you know when to let them go?
well, the bomb site determined that. I had set in a lot of information in the bomb site, various calculations that we had a lot of manual, 2 or 3 manual computers that did different things. The impact of the wind and the direction of the wind and all these sort of things, and the altitude, and it would click down, and I would tell the pilot that I would count it out starting with 10, 9, 8, 7, and bombs away, kind of thing.
Button?
Yeah.
Switch?
No, well, it depended on whether I could do that, or I could toggle them out, or I could salvo them. I could do anything. I had switches to do almost anything, but I would let the bomb sight turn that switch for me that would release them.
Oh, it did it automatically?
Yeah.
Wow. And then could you see the bombs falling?
Oh yeah, I'd watch them going down. Yeah.
Could you hear them explode?
No, I couldn't hear them, but I certainly watched them, and it was frightening at times because they made a tremendous explosion, and it was kind of interesting to watch. And then when that occurred, my camera would be taking the pictures, and I would close the bomb bay doors and give the pilot an okay, what we call an okay to turn, and
Did everybody drop their bombs at the same time?
pretty much it depended. Yes,
All
and
your formation?
yeah.
So that must have made quite a racket.
Oh my God, yes, yeah, and particularly if it was if you spaced them out. If you're like, for instance, if you were going through a rail yard, I could space them to hit every 50 feet, or how far apart I wanted them, and have them boom, boom, boom. It was really something, yeah, really amazing.
They
And
must not have liked that. So they must have been shooting at you, no?
oh yes, oh the flak would be terrible. Yeah, a lot of the bigger cities, they would have flak on railroad cars that would follow us in toward the city on the local railroad tracks, and it was kind of hard to get away from them. But that was up to our fighter planes, which accompanied us, and we call them little friends, and we call the enemy aircraft bandits. We enjoyed protection from, depending on, mostly P-51 fighter planes, because they were a longer range plane than like a P-47. Then we ran into the initial jet airplanes that the Germans had, and that took what the fighter planes called, it took 5 P-51s to corral one jet, and they would fly a box, and they'd get on 4 corners, try to get him in the middle, and then one guy would be way up much higher and come screaming down on top of him, and he'd have to go to one of the 4 corners to get away, and there's a guy waiting there with this P-51 and shoot him and hopefully down him. Yeah.
What did the flak do? It was a shell that was shot up in the air and then exploded?
Exploded, yeah.
Metal would shoot.
Oh yeah, yeah, big hunks of metal. Yeah, I lost a nose on one of our trips, a plexiglass nose. It landed right in my lap. I had a flak vest on. In the bomb run, I would wear a flak vest, which was like a baseball catcher's chest protector, and it was very heavy. And this one particular day, a piece of flak hit our nose, and pieces of it landed right on my chest, but it didn't cause any problems because I had the flak vest on. But it was kind of exciting for a while. The engineer was a very resourceful guy, and he always had everything he needed in his tool bag. And I asked him what he wanted to do with this. I couldn't sit here much longer, and because it was, it was 50 below zero, and he came up with a pair of flying coveralls. I don't know where he got them. It didn't really matter. he came and helped me, and we stuffed them out through the hole in the nose, and had suspenders on them, and they were flapping around on the nose, and it was kind of funny. And when we landed back at the base, I remember the tower called and called out our plane as we taxied along, and he saw the suspenders hanging out of the nose and said he had visitors from the U.S. with him that day, and who's the bombardier on that plane? And so I responded and told them who I was, and I said, I'm fine, there's no problem here. And it was amazing. They couldn't get over it, but there were these big suspenders flying outside. I don't know, as we taxied by the tower. Yeah.
Did you ever get hit by any flak?
Oh yeah, we had lots of yeah.
Or did you get caught or anything?
Oh no, we had lots of repairs to the plane over the
How
yeah.
about the guys on the plane? Did anybody ever get a?
No, I never had an injury, but we sure had a lot of holes in the plane, and it took a lot of sheet metal repair work.
Fix it up, huh?
Yeah,
So you make the turn and then you head for home. That was
Yeah.
probably a happy sight.
yeah. Close the doors. Okay to turn, and we had a predetermined route home, and we would follow that, and soon enough we would see the white cliffs of Dover on the channel, and knew we were pretty nearly home.
And the Germans stopped attacking after you got over the channel.
Oh yeah, yeah. The danger consisted all the way across the Dutch and French borders. You just couldn't trust anything. We kept our guard up until we were ready to land, practically. And we had a big emergency airport near the coast called Woodbridge, and that's where a plane would go if it was badly damaged. If they couldn't get the wheels down, or something other horrible problem existed, you could almost land sideways on a runway. They were so big. It was just a big concrete field, really. And that's where you would go. You know, other than that, we would get back to the base, and taxiing in, you had to stop the plane, and a couple of MPs would climb on board they'd meet you with a Jeep, and they would climb on board while we held the plane, and they would take out my camera and leave the plane, and they would have the films developed in time for by the time we got back for the briefing. We would park the plane on our own hard stand, we called it, and we hadn't eaten. Most of these missions took 7.5, 8 hours. We ate probably an hour and a half before we ever took off in the first place. So we, had nothing to eat all day except a box of, we each had a box of gumdrops, sugar candy, just sugar gumdrops, really, is what they were, like orange slices, or it could be anything. And I don't know how they decided on that, but that's what we usually carried. And
Did you smoke cigarettes on the plane?
only under 10,000 feet.
Oh, because of the oxygen.
Yeah. You couldn't smoke above that with the oxygen going. It'd be too dangerous. But
What did they do with this debriefing thing?
well, we would go back to the debriefing, and we would stop on the way in there was a bar, and you were entitled to 2 ounces of whiskey, and they had Red Cross people there pouring out the whiskey or whatever you wanted. You could have water if you wanted it, but everybody took a shot of whiskey usually. You were kind of nervous and hadn't eaten anything for a long time, and you had to go to this briefing, And you'd then go to the briefing and you'd sit there and they would put up Lieutenant Bowler's pictures for the day, and they could superimpose them on the target so you knew exactly how well you how well you hit the target, and it was really kind of exciting.
Did they keep track of the bandits who shot down?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Did you get any?
Well, I don't know if I ever hit one, but I certainly, with the nose chin turret I had under my feet, my job was to watch for what we called 12 o'clock high coming at us from the front, from up above or from down below. And we had tracer bullets, and so I would fire and these twin 50s and lay them out there, and he could obviously see the tracers, and he held them off. He just knew he couldn't get any closer. This is too close for comfort.
50 cal machine gun?
Yeah, there's a pair of them there, and they really worked. And I'd lay out the spray of bullets out there, and he would turn off. And
the formation must have had a lot of these tracer bullets going all over the place.
yeah, they did.
Exciting.
Yeah. So anyway.
So the mission's over. What do you do? Then you have a couple days off?
No, you could fly. You could fly 4 days in a row. Usually, that happened to us only once out of my 19 missions. I think it only happened once. 2 days was very common, and 3 days was less common, but we got involved with that too. So, and then every 13 days we had 3 days off.
So you would leave at 5 or 6 in the morning and get back home at kind of 2 or 3 in the afternoon?
Yeah.
And then debrief, have dinner,
Yeah.
go to sleep, and get up and do it again?
Yeah. Yeah. That was it was a tough grind.
How old
We were all in pretty good physical condition. We did a lot of conditioning. We kept,
Calisthenics and
yeah, we did a lot of that. That was important. And we were all in very good shape.
How old were you then, huh?
I was 21.
what about the loss rate was like 10%, wasn't it? How about the crews that didn't come back?
Well, the loss rate was very high in the 8th Air Force. It was determined at a time to be the most dangerous service in the entire armed forces. There were 200,000 airmen assigned to the 8th Air Force over the entire war, something in that number. Probably 20,000 were killed, which was quite a number, and probably 26,000 became prisoners of war. In other words, they were shot down. And so the odds were not really great, and no one told you that until after you got there. As a matter of fact, that you aspired to go to the 8th Air Force. That was somehow they maintained that mirage that if you work hard, you might make the 8th Air Force.
Did you guys talk about that much when you were over there?
No, we really didn't. We really didn't. No one wanted to talk about it, I guess.
Because there must have been guys in your barracks that just disappeared.
Oh yeah, well we had yes. Oh sure, that happened all the time. Yeah.
What happened to their stuff?
Well, they had a system that worked pretty well, and what happened is if a crew was shot down, it was reported to the military police function on the base right away, and military police would go immediately to your bedside where you had a foot locker and a clothes hanger, and they would take your personal possessions and lock them up. and before the planes landed, that would be done. And matter of fact, we joked one time. I was at a convention of our bomb group in Arizona, and one man there realized that I was on Bill Cotta's crew, and Cotta's bed was next to my bed in the barracks, and
Bill Cotta was your pilot?
yeah, and this fellow said he had a lousy mattress when he checked into the barracks. It was a British mattress made out of 3 pieces or 4 pieces. And so when he heard Cotta's crew was shot down, he said the first thing he did was, after the MPs took the footlockers and everything, he grabbed the mattress from Cotta's bed. And he said it bothered him for the rest of his life, practically, that I wonder whatever happened to Bill Cotta, because he said, I stole his mattress. So we all had big laughs over that. Yeah.
And what did you guys do on your days off?
Well, we had to leave every 13 days. We had 3 days off. If we weren't flying, even when we were on duty, we had to go to, we would go and practice at ground school, or to the pistol range. We were all pretty good shots. We did an awful lot of target shooting.
Your 45 handgun?
Yeah, we carried each were armed with a Colt 45 automatic for your protection if you bailed out. We had a problem with the German situation. Airmen were, a lot of them were murdered. If you landed in a city, the people would hang you up in the town square or whatever, and or a farmer. A lot of fellows got pitchforked by farmers and things of that sort. So we each carried a sidearm, so that you could go down and looking like an American, and you'd probably take some people with you. But because they didn't expect you to fight your way out of the middle of Germany, but at least you could do something. And so we did an awful lot of target shooting, and then on our 3-day off, we invariably went to London. We would leave the base, get a truck. They take you over to a local town nearby where they had a railroad station, and we'd take a train into London, and we'd spend time in London for a couple of days and see the sights and get some decent food. And
You could stay overnight?
oh yeah,
Put you up in a hotel?
yeah, yeah.
Weren't they bombing London at the time?
Oh yeah, they were, sure.
And when that happened, what did you do?
Well, we'd go to an air raid shelter. We did that several times. Various air raid shelters, yeah. Subway stations and.
Yeah. What was the mood like in London? Were they upbeat?
Well, yeah, people were not bad. They liked Americans. The relationships were very good. There wasn't a whole lot of good food around. They just didn't have it. You could go to the best restaurant in town, and you know, it was really not a great meal, and probably on the expensive side. So chances are we would go to an American officers' mess hall, or dining hall, where they had a couple of those in London. And
Were there famous people? Would you see Winston Churchill there ever?
no, I didn't. No, we never really.
To the Eisenhower headquarters ever?
Yeah, in the Grosvenor House, which was the headquarters for what they called SHAPE, the supreme headquarters of the Allied powers in Europe, where Eisenhower's office was. On the first floor, there was an American officers' dining hall, and that's where we would do most of our eating. Yeah. and the food there wasn't all that bad, about like we had at the base.
Yeah. How many missions did you do total?
Well, we had completed 18 missions, and I was on my 19th mission.
Okay.
And
Where were you headed to? And
we were headed to a town or city north of Hamburg. I think it was called Neumünster, Germany, and it was a major railroad yard and facility that they wanted to destroy. And we were approaching the city of Hanover, Germany, coming from the west over the channel and across Holland and into the Hanover area. And we were making we were at altitude and doing very well.
so like 25,000 feet or something?
Yeah, and we're making a big left turn over an area called Steinhutter Lake, which was a huge water lake, freshwater lake. And we made the turn, and we ran into serious fighter problems with enemy aircraft, and our escort were P-51s, and they were all over the place. But this one plane got through and shot out our number 4 engine, which immediately started on fire. Took a couple of steps to shut the engine down or see what would happen, and we couldn't get it out. And our leader called us and gave us orders to leave the formation and bail the crew out. And it was as simple as that.
Could you not make it back on 3 engines?
Well, the number 3 engine was beginning to burn or smoking, yeah. So the plane would probably blow up. And we had a lot of gasoline left on board, and we had to get out of the formation, and we would get blown to bits by the enemy aircraft.
Oh,
They were all over the place.
so how do you get out of the formation? Did you get out of the formation?
Yes, we did.
Did you dive or climb?
No, we just turned. Bill Cotta and I had a chat, and he and I were very close buddies over all these months, and we kicked around what we each thought, and we had a call from the tail gunner that we had to do something in a hurry because he said, "I've got the flames going right by my window," and he was in the tail of the plane. And so we decided, well, that does it. Let's go. So Bill started the alarm bell. We have a bailout bell on the plane, kind of a gong, and he ordered the crew to bail out, and we had a procedure to make that happen. We had practiced many times, and
So you had to go get a parachute? Or you had that on already?
well, we had what we call chest pack parachutes. You carried them around with you, and you clipped them on the harness. The harness had hooks on the front, and you just hooked them on there. I had to destroy the bomb site, so I fired 2 rounds through into the gyro area with my .45, and
You got a full load of bombs too, don't you?
yeah,
What'd you do with those?
nothing. Went down, and the engineer was trying to open the nose hatch, which was a door about, I don't know, maybe 2 feet square, and he was trying too hard. He had it open, but if you pull this cord right next to it, it pulled the pins out of the hinges, and the door disappeared. It just blew away. So I reminded him he had to pull the cord, and so he did that, and I followed him out. He bailed out, and I followed him.
So you just climb up this little hole and jump?
Yeah, you just sit down, sit on the floor, and stick your feet out and roll out the door. And we had the sky was full of what we call bandits, enemy aircraft, and we were really under an enormous attack. And I had noticed that there was a cloud cover several feet down below us, and probably 10,000 feet down. We were at about 30,000 feet. And I recommended to the crew they try to hold their chute until they got into that cloud layer because of all the enemy aircraft in the area. And
Did you have your oxygen thing with you?
you didn't, yeah, no, you just left, you didn't need that. You just let it go.
So you jump out and you're basically a free fall?
Yeah.
Were you like skydiving? Or
Yeah, well, no, I'm not quite sure. I don't recall that exactly, but it was kind of exciting. And
We have some
had you
pictures.
ever jumped out of an airplane?
no.
How did they teach you how to?
Well, they didn't. They said we can't practice anything. You have to do perfect the first time. One fellow, this aviation cadet, asked the instructor, well, what's it like when you land? And he said, well, I've never really done it personally, but he said, I would liken it perhaps to, if you're familiar with a big red farm barn back home, he said, yeah, it's probably about like jumping off the roof. And that's the best I can tell you. So you just simply have to do the best you can. So
So anyways, you jump, everybody gets out, I assume.
yeah, so all 9 of us got out of the plane safely.
You fly down and you hit the clouds.
Yeah,
Then you pull the ripcord.
I did. And
What happened then?
the whole thing, I took about 15 minutes, I always figured, to get down. And had no idea where on earth I was. We were over dry land, I knew that. We had crossed that huge lake I mentioned. And I landed in a plowed field, actually, a big, huge garden area. And the idea of the instructions always were to, bury the chute and head for the woods. And the woods were a long way from where I personally was. And I started heading toward the woods, and I heard gunfire, and I looked around, and there were German soldiers on the other side of the field, probably a quarter of a mile from me, and they had a Jeep, a German Jeep, and they were firing at me. And so I laid down and I decided I don't know what to do, whether crawl or I really can't get away from them. They have a car. They caught one of them had a rifle. I could see the guy with the rifle, and he was firing, standing up in this Jeep, and it was a bigger car than our American Army Jeep. But I decided with a guy with a rifle firing at me, he could probably hit me or pick me off. So I better stop. And so I surrendered. I laid there on the ground, and they came up, and it was a German officer, a captain, there with the big leather coat, and looked like he's right out of the movies. They all surround me, and everybody's got a gun, and I told him I was an American, and he said, and of course I had an American flag on my sleeve. So the captain came up to me in typical German and looked at me, and first thing he said to me was, "Haben Sie Camel?" He was looking for cigarettes, And I did smoke cigarettes in those days, but I smoked Chesterfields. And I left a pack on the dashboard of the plane. Never thought of them. I just jumped out of the plane and left them there. And I would have given anything to have that pack of cigarettes right then. So I told him I didn't have any.
Could he speak English?
No, he didn't know. And so they spoke broken English. And so in the car, they had this German flyer they had picked up, and I assumed that's what they were doing out there. Was he had probably somehow radioed or something, and this was probably the guy that shot us down, and he hurt himself when he bailed out. He broke off his upper front teeth, and he was bleeding very badly and had this broken tooth thing, and obviously was hurting pretty bad. And I got they put me in the car with them, and they had to get him some help. So they were heading toward a town, and the town happened to be Bergen, Germany. And we ran off the road. It was a dirt road in this country area, and we actually skidded off the road at one point, and we all jumped out to get the car back on the road, and I got out and pushed it with them. I helped, and they didn't have me tied up or anything, and I thought that was the thing to do, and nobody objected, so we rode into the town, and they took him to some kind of a dispensary or something, and they took me to the town jail and dropped me off there. And I hooked up with this pilot later, the guy with the broken teeth, and it turns out he's the one that shot us down. He had my plane number, and I had to believe him. I had no reason not to. His bailout ejection seat or whatever, he didn't work, or something didn't work, and he hit his face when he was getting out of the cockpit and broke off his upper front teeth. And he was really hurting bad, but he had my plane number, and he came back and talked to us later, and he, because there were 3 or 4 of us put together in this town jail. And so he was very proud of the fact that he shot us down. I didn't even know what rank he was. I wasn't that familiar with that, but he was an officer in the German Air Force, and a young fellow. And wish I had taken his name, actually, but I didn't have my wits about me, I guess, or I wasn't thinking along those lines. But
So were there other crew guys in the jail?
yeah, there was a couple of them. Detweiler was there, and Johnson, the radio operator. But they were both sitting there, and they both jumped out of their seat when they saw me. And it was kind of fun, actually. It was very kind of reassuring that I got 2 other guys here.
And that was sort of early morning when you got shot down?
No, yeah, it was, we got shot down around noontime, around the middle of the day. So this was late afternoon, I'd say, when we met. And then next thing that happened, in walked Bill Cotta, my pilot, and Harvey Ainsworth was our co-pilot that day. He was, poor Harvey, he was a spare. Our co-pilot was being given his own crew. They were making him a first pilot. And that day we flew with a spare co-pilot we had never flown with before. And I hardly knew the guy, and his name was Ainsworth. And so he showed up with Bill Cotta, and the end of the day came, and they gave us some soup or something, and they put us each in our own cell and locked us up for the night. And there was no comfort or anything in the cell. It was strictly a concrete box-like room, and had a plank bed with no blanket or nothing. I have pictures of that jail that my friend over in Germany took pictures of it and mailed them to me. So we stayed there for a couple of days, and they took us to an air base.
Did they feed you while you were there?
Hmm?
Did they feed you at all?
Hardly anything.
Like some
No,
thin soup or something?
no, I forget what, but really, it was very, very hungry. They had to ask them for water. I remember that. We went to this air base in Celle, C-E-L-L-E, Celle, Germany, which was not far away. We got on a truck and they took us there, and we met up with a whole gang of other Americans that were prisoners at this German air base. And they took us out into the woods. We stayed overnight there, I guess, and took us out in the woods, in this wooded area, and we had to strip to the waist. We got in a big circle, and everybody stripped to the waist, and they fished our clothing, and some in our flying suits we had buttons that were actually compasses, and they knew that, so they were looking for those buttons, and they cut them off our flight suits. These little compasses, you could actually put them on a twig, and it had a little impression on one side of the button, and that would be north, and it would go, that would point to the north. So it was kind of a crude device that the Air Force used, but anyway, they had a German officer there and several non-commissioned officers, and this group of men, prisoners, and there were probably 30 of us, I guess, quite a group. And my navigator was standing right next to me, and there we are, stripped to the waist, and the German officer has given us a screaming lecture in Germany, and I guess he's just trying to tell us, you know, who's boss here, and anybody here, he wanted to know if anybody here spoke German. And I didn't, and I guess most of us, everybody said no, and that was okay. And so then they came around and were taking the buttons off. With the German enlisted men were cutting off the button, and my navigator is standing next to me, and somebody says something to him, and he answered 9, and said no in German, and I don't know whatever possessed him, but he told me later that he took a course in high school in German, and he couldn't resist, and the guy hit him with a rifle and knocked him right down on his, knocked him right over, and didn't hurt him badly, but he was lucky, and
Did you ever think they were going to shoot you all?
well, we you know, we really didn't know what was going to happen there. It was kind of scary. Yeah. And I think the idea was they were just going to convince us that who was in charge here now, and you guys are not in charge of anything. And that sort of ended, and I never did know what the purpose was. And so we went from there to forget the name of the place, but we went to a prison camp, a German POW camp for American flyers, and we didn't stay there either, but there we met up with various interrogations, and the Colonel Klink kind of, Sergeant Schultz, that routine, and
Do they ask you questions about your plane?
yeah, and they impressed you that they knew all about you. This officer was sitting there, the Colonel Klink type, and had the book, and he had everything about me. He knew where my hometown was, where I had gone to aviation cadet school, and where I had graduated from Bombardier School, and all of those facts. And the idea was, I guess they were just trying to impress us who was in charge again. That seemed to be a big motivator for them.
No physical abuse, though. They never
No,
beat you or
no, nobody punched you around or anything like that. No, I had no problem.
probably didn't feed you very much.
No, it was a very hungry routine. Yeah, yeah. And we went on from there to various other locations. We went to the city of Hamburg, and we went through Hamburg one evening, and we actually went on the subway train to get from one side of Hamburg to the other, I guess. And the subway station was mobbed with German people, and they were all yelling and screaming at us, and there were about half a dozen of us together. And we each had like 2 guards, and every other guard had a dog. So it was kind of an odd group, and we were going, and we went through the city and to a train station. And then we went to a POW camp from there over near the city of Lubeck on the Baltic. And
That was a train. They put you on a train,
yeah,
like a boxcar.
yeah, we jumped, yeah, and we had a couple of those experiences on riding in a freight car when our own fighter planes would blow up the train, and so we had to jump off, and that's when Detweiler damaged his ankle. We had a tough time with him because we jumped off this. The train was still sort of moving a little bit and rolled down this bank, and Detweiler hurt his ankle, or he twisted his ankle, and it was a real mess.
Did the guards jump off with you?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
So you guys weren't.
yeah. And the dog and the guards, and oh my God, it was really. So anyway, it was quite.
You were at some rail station.
Oh yeah, we were in a city of Soltau, Germany, Soltau, Soltau, which is a fair-sized place, and we were hiking. I don't know how many of us, not many, but was Kata and myself and Detweiler and I forget who else, not one other guy, I think. Anyway, we had each, there was like 2 guards per each of us, and every other guard had a dog. And we got to Soltau, and the British were coming to bomb the place. It was just turning dark, and the sirens were going, and everything is pandemonium. And so everybody is running for the shelter, the town shelter. It's a pretty good sized city, Soltau. And so we go down in the shelter with the guards, and then the guards decide, you guys can't stay here. The people were really, really upset with us. And so one guard could speak broken English, and he told us, look, you guys are on your own. He said, well, we're going to stay in here. Hang around the yard, do the best you can, and when it's over, we'll all get together. And there was nowhere we could go. It's getting dark, and I hardly knew where we were. So Kata and I saw this little brick building, which was an old-fashioned railroad station, and we ran for that, and got underneath these benches like pews in the station, and the British came and bombed the place. Oh my goodness. And everything is blowing up, and I think we saw the penny scale go flying across the station, and it finally ended, and we got out of there, and sure enough, the guards we got us reassembled, and we were all there, and
Just you and Kata, or the rest of your?
the rest of us, yeah.
All 9 of you?
Yeah. well, no, not 9. It was only. Let's see. There were only 4 of us from our own crew. We lost 2 or 3 guys that they went in different directions. I forget what actually happened to them. I'd have to really think that over. Tommy Walsh, the tail gunner, and Whitling, the waist gunner, they actually got away. I don't know how they did it, but I forget where they wound up. But anyway, there was only about 4 of us together from our crew, and Cotta and myself and Detweiler, I know, and we took off and just walked, and these German guards were with us, and every other one of them had a dog, and that's when we slept one night in the snow. It snowed,
Yeah.
and
You're up now, north part of Germany?
yeah, and we were getting up toward the Baltic, and it was really not very good. And we did get to a German camp one night where there was a nurse, and that's when they tried to tape up Detweiler's ankle, but all they had was paper, and the nurse had put some stuff on. I had developed a couple of huge blisters. I was still wearing my flying boots, and they had taken away my electric slippers, which kind of filled out the boot. And I left my shoes on board the plane. I had carried a pair of GI shoes, and I had them tied together so I could take them when I bailed out, but I forgot them. And so I was walking in these flying boots, and eventually I got a pair of shoes. They gave me a pair, but they were too short, so they cut the toes off. So I had,
Toes of the shoe.
yeah, I had some dead Germans' shoes with no toes, but they were better than the flying boots. It was easier on my feet.
What happened at the end there when the Germans just left you? How'd you get away?
Well, we wound up. They made we went through the city of Lübeck, Germany, which is a fairly good-sized place, and up on the Baltic, there was a huge prisoner of war camp, and I guess that we must have been heading for that, but the British were not that far south of there, firing artillery up into that area, and the Russians were actually coming from the east, and they took over this farm, and they strung up some barbed wire, and there were our guys and probably 20 other prisoners. I don't know where they came from. They were Americans, and they made a little prison camp out of this barn and chicken coop and things, and they had German guards there, and that's where we stayed when the war was ending. And the British were coming from the south, and we could hear the cannon fire. It was really wicked, and the Russians were firing from the east, and the Germans, I guess, didn't know what to do. And that whole area, after the war became East Germany. The Russians had actually taken over that whole area of Lübeck and so forth. Lübeck was a pretty good-sized city, and finally one night, the German officer came and told me that they were going to surrender that area to the British, and they would be leaving that night. And so he said, "There'll be nobody here in the morning. You'll be on your own." But he said, be careful and keep your head down and watch where you go because there's activity all over the place. So they left during the night, and Kata and I walked into Lubeck that next day, and it was kind of a nice city, and people had the sheets hanging out of their windows in their homes, and the British were taking over that whole area. And in rolled these British tanks. I had never been that familiar with tank warfare, and these guys were really rough, and the tanks would be careless going around corners and knock down lamp posts and everything. They just didn't seem to care. We saw them come up the main street. There were a couple of stores, and they machine gunned the plate glass windows. And the soldiers ran in, and these tanks had the big yellow rat painted on the side of them, and they were the British 8th Army, armored, and they came all the way from North Africa, and here they were up at the Baltic Sea. So they had been at it for a long time. And Kata and I got picked up by a British major in a Jeep, and he wanted to know what we were doing there, and we explained it to him. And we each had one dog tag and showed him that we were an American officer. And he took an interest in us. And I asked him, why are they destroying the stores and all? And he said, well, they're not mad at anybody. He said they're just looking for clean underwear or clean socks in the store, and they'll just break in and take what they want. So that's what we do.
Was there civilians in the town at that point?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or they must have been just.
Well, they were scared to death. They all had sheets hanging out of their windows, and they didn't quite know what was going to happen. And
So this major picks you up and.
yeah, and he said, "Where are you guys staying?" We said, "Well, we just left a camp." So he said, "Well, pick out a house." And
This is in Lubeck?
yeah, in Lubeck, and get in. So we drove around with him, and he went up this nice residential area and street. He says, "There's a nice house." So he goes up on the door. He's got a machine gun, a Tommy gun, and he bangs on the door. And this elderly woman comes to the door, and he spoke fluent German to her. And when he's done, I said, well, what did you tell her? And he said, I told her you two guys were going to stay here tonight, and you needed some hot water, and you needed supper. And if there's any problem, I'm coming back to get them in the morning. I'll burn the house to the ground. So let's leave it that way. And I said, well, thanks. What do we do? He said, just go ahead. She's ready to, she's going to help you. And so everybody in the house disappeared. They all went down the cellar, I guess. And so this elderly woman fussed around in the kitchen, and she gave us the master bedroom, which was a feather bed. I'd never slept in a feather bed in my life. And she gave us a big copper tub full of hot water so we could wash, and it just.
Probably your first.
Oh my God! It was wonderful. It was wonderful.
You get dinner then too?
Yeah, she fixed dinner for us, and even had a glass of wine, and everybody had disappeared and in the house, and sure enough, in the morning the major showed up, and so we got in the Jeep, and he took us to an airfield outside of town. Said that it's being run by the British Army, and he says just introduce yourself to whoever in charge, and he said they'll get you on a plane back to England. And the war hadn't officially ended yet. This was in early April of 1945, and we introduced ourselves to the commander of this group at the air base, and he took our names and everything and gave us a tent to sleep in, and he said they would try and get us on a plane to England. and they were flying British prisoners back to England. And we stayed there for a day or two, and we figured that he's never going to give us a ride because he's got his own people filling the plane. So we asked him about leaving, and he said okay, he'd give us a pass. So he made out an ID card for each of us. And Kata and I started hiking, and he gave us a direction that we ought to head. And was south, heading south from there. And we were heading toward Nuremberg, that's right. And we're walking on the side of the road, and every time a car came or a truck or anything, we ducked in the woods because the war wasn't over. It was had another day or two to go. And eventually we got picked up by an American truck, a tractor trailer. It was full of empty gasoline cans, and it had a machine gunner up on the top, and a young fellow driving the truck, and we got right out in the road and stopped him. And he said, well, he'd give us a ride, but we had to get up on the back. So we were up there riding on the back of these gas cans, and branches on the trees and everything, and he's going like crazy. And he finally got to a fork in the road somewhere, and he told us we had to get off. He was going to go this way, and we ought to go that way. So we left him, and we got picked up by British MPs. And this was a British area. And they took us to a schoolhouse, which was their headquarters. And there was a captain in charge there. He introduced himself, and that was the night the war ended. That was May 7th or April 7th, May 7th, I guess it was. He fed us and made some inquiries somehow, and he came back and told us that you two guys really have to get to Brussels. And he said, I'll tell you what, if I can work this out, I'll get you a ride to Brussels. It was like a day and a half away. And I said, well, okay, that'd be wonderful. So we kind of celebrated the end of the war that evening with he and some of his crew, and in this little old schoolhouse. And he had some beer, and we had a little party there, and he had some food. And the next day he gave us a Jeep and a driver, and he took us to Brussels. And it was a long trip for him, and he told the driver where to take us to this hotel in Brussels. It didn't mean anything to Bill or I, and so we wound up at this fancy hotel. It was just something like the Waldorf Astoria, and Brussels had not been hit or bombed or anything. It was a nice-looking city. So we walked into the hotel, and it was all American officers. And what it was an American officers R&R hotel. And I went to the desk, and a corporal came to the desk, and he looked at us, and we were both, terribly ragged. And
You're still in your flying suit?
yeah. And I had the shoes with no toes in them, and hadn't shaved in a month or so, and
You were alive then.
the corporal almost fainted, and wanted to know. And I showed him my dog tag. That's all I had, and he said, I don't know what I wanted. And I said, well, we'd like a room. He said, just a moment, sir. And so he disappeared. And I suppose he's on the phone back in the back room there. And shortly, American MP captain showed up with his MP badge on his sleeve. He says, Lieutenant, what are you guys doing here? And I told him. And he says, you can't stay here. He says, you can't even be in this lobby without a Class A uniform. And he said, you don't look like you belong here at all. And so he says, come on with me, get in the Jeep. So he drove us all over town showing us the sights. And I figured out later he was just wasting time with us. And he took us to the railroad station. And he said, this is the place for you. He said, now go in that station. And he said, at so-and-so time, there'll be a train leaving for Namur, Germany, or Namur, Belgium. You get on that train, it'll have an American crew, and they'll take you on and get off in Namur, and there's a collection station there for prisoners. And he said, good luck, and we shook hands. And he was a very pleasant guy. I never did get his name either. And we got on that train, and the two of us got off in Namur, Belgium. And that, sure enough, that was a collection point for American prisoners. And they deloused us there and gave us clean clothes and food and cleaned us up and filled out paperwork and actually gave us some back pay and told us that we were going to go to a Camp Lucky Strike in France. And that would be a collection point for prisoners en route to the United States. So that sounded pretty good to us. So in a day or two, a couple of days, we got on this train, and I became train commander. My name was at the top, beginning with a B. I was the first officer on the list. So there was a corporal, American corporal was the conductor. So it was a hospital train with the berths 4 high on each side of the aisle, and everybody had to have a berth. And we filled the train, and Kata got a berth, and I was walking with this corporal, and he was showing me around, and we couldn't find a berth for me, so he said, I've got just a place for the two of you. So he went, at the end of one car, there was a padded cell. It was all leather, like a mattress on the floor was like a mattress. And so he said, you can stay in here and sleep right on the floor. So we did that. It was an overnight ride. And we got off in Fécamp, France. And there was Lucky Strike. And there was 50,000 American ex-POWs there in a tent city that they had built. And this was near Le Havre, which was the port of embarkation for the United States. So we stayed there, I don't know, several days. But the second day we were there, Eisenhower came, made a speech, and it's covered in a section in his book that he wrote. And Bill Cotta and I were right up to the front of the crowd and listening to Eisenhower, and he said he was sorry, but he said we were going to have to go home on ships. He says, most of you guys are in the Air Force. He said, I asked General Doolittle asked me if he could fly his American 8th Air Force guys home. And I told him, I asked him if he could fly all the prisoners home. And he said, no, I can't fly all of them. Well, he says, if you can't fly all of them, you can't fly any of them. So I'm sorry, guys, but you're going to have to go home on ships. And the Queen ships are all in the other parts of the world. So he said, what I've done is lined up a bunch of freighters. And they're over in Le Havre right now, cleaning them up and painting them and getting them ready. And so in a few days, we'll get you over there and get you on a ship back to the United States. And they did. So we stayed, Bill Cotta and I we had a tent, the two of us, and a bunk, and we stayed there a few days, and finally they came and told us we were leaving. So Cotta and I shook hands and went our separate ways, and
You got on different ships?
yeah, we got on different ships. I went to the port of New York, and he went to some other place. He was going to California where he lived, and so that was a train connection or something. I don't know what it was, but anyway, I got on a ship, a Liberty ship for New York City. and we crossed the ocean. It took about 2 weeks, almost 2 weeks. And it turned out that the captain of the ship was a high school classmate of mine. Of course, I hadn't seen him in a long time, and we joked about it. This was the first time he had ever crossed the ocean alone. He had always been in convoys, and so we joked that we had some Air Force navigators on board, and we'd dig them out, and they'll keep you on course. So we had a lot of laughs on that, but anyway, we had a reasonably pleasant trip back to New York, and we landed in Hoboken, New Jersey, and got off and went to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey, and stayed overnight, and then got a train to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. I lived in Springfield, Mass. In those days, and or my parents did, and I went to Fort Devens and got processed for separation, and took a train from Worcester, Mass. to Springfield, and took a taxi from the station to my parents' home, and there was no one home. So I sat on the front steps at the house. Well, they weren't sure of the time. I didn't know when I was going to get there, and my mother was at the store or something, and so anyway, I had the whole neighborhood around the house, and it was kind of exciting.
And so when you got home, did you have a big celebration?
Yeah, we had fun, and I had to get a hold of Ruth, and Ruth and I were dating then.
We didn't see each other very much.
No.
Were you writing letters back and forth?
Oh, yeah.
Letters?
Oh, sure.
England?
Yeah.
Obviously, you couldn't write them from Germany.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was just worried about you, because they got a telegram.
Yeah, they got a couple of telegrams. They got a telegram that I had been shot down, and then they got another telegram that I had been returned to Allied control. Then from Camp Lucky Strike, I was able to send a message that I was still in France, but I'd be home soon, and I was fine. And the last sentence on the telegram, and I still have this at home on the wall. I said, "Please call Ruth." And that's my Ruth.
And your whole crew made it back?
Yep, we all made it back.
Nobody?
No one got hurt or killed or, no.
Wow.
They're all dead now. All.
Did you guys ever get together after the
Oh, we did. Yeah, we had 2 or 3 reunions. Yeah.
the whole crew?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, we had 2 or 3 reunions.
Yeah.
But
My father was
the last one or two, there were only 2 or 3 of us there. Yeah, they began to die off, type of thing.
Didn't some guy find part of your plane or something? A bank?
Oh yes, yeah. I call that the needle in the haystack. I had a telephone call years later, a few years ago now, from a lady in Denver saying that she was calling for a friend of hers in Germany, and they had actually found remnants of my airplane, and she wanted to know if I was flying on a B-17 number. They had a couple of the tail numbers, and which I've used all my life, 225, Square J 225. And she said they tracked it down from the Air Force in Europe to the museum in Tucson, and they got my name. They got several names, and Bowler was the first one on the list, alphabetically. So she called me one morning and said her friend over there, she had been born in Germany and came here as a youngster and became a citizen, but this family over there, this fellow Bars, They still corresponded regularly with her. So she was acting as their agent and tracked me down, and that put us in touch. Yeah.
Did you ever go back over there?
No, never did. No. I went as close as Munich. I've been in Munich, Germany since the war, but never got back to any of my travels.
Did any other crew ever go back?
No, I don't believe so. No.
You were 19 when you went into the
Yeah.
force?
Well, yeah, I was 21 when I was shot down.
Do you still remember how to run the bomb site, the Norton bomb site? Because I've seen pictures.
Would I know how?
It looks massively complicated.
Well,
Never clue.
I suppose I could. Yeah, it was not easy. It was a complicated instrument. There was a lot that went with it.
Had a bunch of dials on it. And you would
Yeah,
dial
yeah.
it.
There was,
Time adjusted for wind and
you had to be pretty good at math, and I had an instructor that we had bomb trainers that were made out of iron pipe and had wheels, and they were mobile, so they could drive around on a gym floor, and you had targets on the floor, and this is how you'd learn before you ever got near an airplane. And this instructor I had used to beat me on the hand with a ruler. You know, when I start to touch a wrong knob or something, he'd whack me. You know, and whoa.
Did you hit him back?
No, I couldn't do that. He was an officer, and it was kind of fun, I guess. Yeah, but
Did you fly a lot of training missions then in Rapid City?
in Rapid City,
City?
oh God, yes, yeah, I was there 6 months. Yeah,
Wow. And you'd fly every day or
every day. Yeah, yeah.
drop fake bombs?
Yeah, there's bombing ranges out there in the Badlands, they called it. Yeah. I dropped hundreds of bombs out there. We had the practice bombs were 100-pound sheet metal bombs filled with sand, and they had a shotgun shell on the tail, which made a puff of smoke, so the camera could photo the hit. And it was very complicated and very competitive and very, very tough. You had to have a good crew. It was really good.
Were they pretty accurate, the bombs?
Yeah, very accurate. Yeah. I remember one time my target was, they had these targets on the ground in South Dakota. I was to bomb a battleship. They had the image of the outline of a battleship, and then there was a submarine over somewhere a few feet away or something. And I hit the submarine instead of the battleship. And my crew was going all over the locker room and everywhere, telling them, boy, they got the best bombardier in the place. And he hit the submarine. It was an accident.
Oh, Dad.
I mean, it looked like a finger lying down there on the ground, you know, from way up. But it was interesting. At the 8th Air Force over in England, we had these big black and white photos of cities and parts of cities that we were going to bomb. And they would lay them out on the floor. And then we had this bomb trainer, which was a thing you ride around on. You climbed up and probably 10 feet in the air and had a sight on it. And you could approach the city from all the different geographic directions and familiarize yourself with the bridges and the railroad yard and all these things, so that when you got there, these were targets to be, sort of. So when you got there, there it is. By God, there's that bridge, and that really wasn't a very effective idea that somebody had, and it worked real good.
Then you carried maps. You must have had maps up in
Oh God, yeah, and map.
Navigator.
Yeah, oh yeah,
On the right spot.
had great maps. Yeah,
And radio, you had that, right?
yep.
You could talk. Did you talk to each other in the plane?
Oh yeah, yeah. We had a good intercom system. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, very good.
And the guys in the waist gunner and the ball turret gunner and the tail gunner.
Yeah,
You just went along for the ride and blasted,
yeah,
shot the 50 cal.
yeah. Oh, yeah. It got to be real noisy when they were all going at once. Yeah,
Oh, it smelled horrible too.
yeah,
Gunpowder everywhere.
yeah. Well, it doesn't bother you because you're on an oxygen mask,
Oh,
you know.
that's right.
Yeah. That was one of the problems was it was so cold that you couldn't touch anything. You had to wear silk gloves. You couldn't touch metal. And your oxygen mask used to fill up with condensation on the bottom under your chin. And so you'd try and have Kleenex so you could, every once in a while, stuff a Kleenex in there to kind of mop it up.
Freeze.
Yeah, and the ice was, if it dripped out, it'd be ice. By the time it hit your chest, rolled down your chest with ice balls. Really something. It wasn't very comfortable.
No.
Personally, it was not very comfortable. If you're using the bomb sight, I was usually on my knee anyway, and not sitting in the chair. I would be on my right knee, as I recall. Yeah.
And did you ever have to go back and the bombs didn't work? Or
Oh, yeah. I used to have I'd hang up. Every once in a while, each bomb had a release, and they were serviced all the time because they had to be almost perfect, you know, and they get an extra drop of oil in them or something, and it would freeze, and the release wouldn't work right. So I'd have to go back, and we'd call it kicking it out. And that happened to me, I don't know, a couple of times, 2 or 3 times anyway. And it was pretty tough because you had to carry a walk-around bottle of oxygen. You had to have a big screwdriver, and I'd get the engineer to help me with that because he was a fairly big fella. And he had a tool bag, and he had all kinds of screwdrivers, and so I could reach it with reach the release with a long screwdriver. And of course the doors are hanging open, and you're on a catwalk about 6 or 8 inches wide, and you're 30,000 feet up, you know. And
you don't want to fall.
oh, no, and all there is a little chain like holding you in there, and you'd have to hopefully release that bomb, and you'd have to get permission, and it was very complicated.
That one just went anywhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You
So
couldn't bring a bomb back.
no, you couldn't land with any bombs. No, you'd have to get them out, but you had to put them in the channel. Then I had to keep track with Detweiler, who was riding in the ball turret, because planes drift in the formation. I had to make sure when the doors are open and I'm waiting to bomb, that some plane hasn't drifted underneath me. It'd be pretty bad, yeah.
That never happened.
No, it never happened. No, well, Detweiler kept me posted, all clear. So there wasn't much conversation. There wasn't much to talk about, but we had a good group, a really good crew. Yeah, they were a great bunch.
Yeah, sounds like you worked well together.
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah.
The missions that you went on, they were pretty similar.
Yeah. Well, I went to several big cities. I bombed Berlin one day. I bombed Hamburg. I bombed Leipzig. I bombed a lot of rail yards. Were a big target. Germany's covered with railroads, or it used to be, and these huge rail yards, we'd rarely wreck them. And then we'd drop bombs that had delayed action fuses, so they wouldn't go off for 2 days. You know, when they were trying to repair the tracks, they'd have a bomb go off.
Did you ever have these massive bombing groups, like 300-400 planes, and really gang up on a city?
Oh yeah, We'd put up hundreds of planes, yeah. Well, it was kind of scary. It bothered me a little bit. I used to always, if you stop to think about it, it would really make you a nervous wreck. But you go over a bigger city like Berlin or Hamburg or somewhere, and there's some pretty good high-rise buildings that are wrecked and blown up, and but they're still fairly tall, parts of them. And if you bail out here and you hook up on if you're coming down and you're hooked up on the 12th floor of something in Berlin, what do you do then, you know? Those crazy thoughts used to run through my head. And I try to change the subject very quickly.
Yeah. Of course, you never got to talk to anybody that got shot down.
No,
So
no. Well, and no, an awful lot of our guys got killed.
yeah.
The German people were merciless, and I guess you know we couldn't blame them. But they did kill a lot of guys.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that's my story.